What happens when a single moment of carelessness collides with the fury of nature? When metal hinges swing free in the dark, and destiny walks through on 4 trembling legs. This is the story of the Mercer Ranch, where one unlocked gate during the worst storm in 20 years brought something no one expected. Something that would expose buried secrets, shatter a family's foundation, and prove that sometimes the most profound changes arrive when we're least prepared to receive them. Mare stood in their driveway at dawn, blood streaming down her right foreleg. Thomas Mercer saw her first through the kitchen window, the coffee pot frozen halfway to his mouth. The horse was grey, nearly white, with a coat so filthy it looked like she'd been dragged through every mudhole between here and the state line. Her head hung low, muzzle almost touching the gravel, ribs visible even through the caked dirt. But it was her eyes that stopped Thomas cold. They held a kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, a depth of suffering that made his chest tighten. His wife Martha appeared at his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. "Thomas," she whispered, "where did she come from?" The storm had passed just before sunrise, leaving the ranch soaked and steaming in the early light. Broken branches littered the ground. The metal roof of the hay barn had partially torn away, flapping loose in the dying wind. And the main gate, the one that opened onto County Road 14, swung wide on its hinges, the chain that should have secured it lying in the mud 10 feet away. Thomas pulled on his boots without answering. Through the window, he watched the mare sway slightly, her injured leg barely touching the ground. Blood dripped steadily onto the gravel, each drop a dark red punctuation mark in the grey morning light. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her flanks heaving with the effort of simply standing. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and ozone. Thomas approached slowly, hands visible, voice low and steady. "Easy now, girl, easy now." The mare's ears flicked toward him, but she didn't move. Up close, the damage was worse than he'd thought. The gash on her foreleg was deep, probably from barbed wire. Fresh welts crossed her hindquarters in a pattern too regular to be accidental. Whip marks, recent ones. And around her neck, rubbed raw into the flesh, was the ghost of a rope burn so severe it had removed hair and skin in a perfect circle. Martha had followed him out, her face pale in the growing light. "Someone did this to her." "Yeah." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Someone did." Their daughter Rebecca emerged from the house, 17 and still in her pajamas, her dark hair wild from sleep. She stopped dead when she saw the horse, and Thomas watched something shift in her expression. Rebecca had been different lately, distant and angry in that way teenagers get when the world disappoints them. She'd been fighting with them for months about leaving for college, about selling her childhood horse dancer to help pay for tuition, about growing up and moving on. The resentment had built a wall between them that grew higher every day. But now, looking at this broken animal in their driveway, Rebecca's face cracked open with something raw and immediate. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "We have to help her." "I'm calling Doc Harrison," Thomas said, already pulling out his phone. The mare shifted her weight and nearly went down. Thomas lunged forward, steadying her with his shoulder while Martha grabbed her halter. The horse trembled against him, every muscle rigid with pain and fear. Her breath came in hot gasps against his neck. "Someone left the gate open," Martha said quietly, looking toward the road. "In the middle of the storm." Thomas followed her gaze. The chain wasn't broken. It had been deliberately removed, carefully laid aside. The gate hadn't blown open in the wind. Someone had opened it. "Dad." Rebecca's voice was tight. "Look at her hooves." Thomas crouched down, careful not to spook the mare. Her front hooves were cracked and overgrown, split in places where they'd gone too long without trimming, but it was her back hooves that told the real story. They were worn down on one side, ground nearly flat, the kind of wear that came from being tied or stalled in one position for so long that the horse could only shift weight in a single direction. "How long was she kept like that?" Rebecca whispered. "Months," Thomas said, his voice hard. "Maybe longer." The mare's breathing was getting more labored, blood pooled on the gravel beneath her injured leg. In the distance, Thomas could hear Doc Harrison's truck rattling up the county road, but he knew what he was seeing. This horse had been systematically neglected, probably abused, And then someone had driven her here during the storm. Someone who knew the Mercer Ranch gate was usually chained. Someone who had waited for a night violent enough to cover their tracks. "Why here?" Martha asked, echoing his thoughts. "Why our ranch?" Thomas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something he'd just noticed, a detail that made his blood run cold. On the mare's right hip, barely visible under the mud and filth, was a brand. Not the kind of brand most ranches used anymore, a simple letter or symbol. This was old-fashioned, intricate, the kind of brand his father had used 40 years ago, the kind of brand that marked a horse as Mercer stock. Rebecca saw it too. "Dad, is that our brand?" "That brand hasn't been used since Grandpa died," Thomas said slowly. "That was 23 years ago." The mare's head drooped lower. Her legs began to buckle. Thomas and Martha held her upright, taking her weight as Doc Harrison's truck skidded to a stop in the driveway. The old veterinarian took one look and started moving fast, his medical bag already open. "Talk to me!" Doc Harrison barked, his hands already examining the leg wound. "Showed up at dawn," Thomas said. "Gate was open. She's got whip marks, rope burns, and she's wearing my father's brand." Doc Harrison's hands stilled for just a second. His eyes met Thomas's over the mare's back. "Your father's brand?" "Yeah." "Thomas, your father sold off his entire breeding stock when he got sick. That was 1997, maybe 98. "I know." "So this horse is at least 23 years old, probably older." Doc Harrison's voice was flat. "That's impossible. Look at her teeth." Thomas held the mare's head while Doc Harrison pried her mouth open. Her teeth told a different story than her brand. She was young, maybe 6 or 7 years old, in her prime, or she should have been. But someone had worked her nearly to death. "Those teeth don't match that brand," Doc Harrison said quietly. "No," Thomas agreed. "They don't." Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, then her face went white. "Dad, there's something on the county Facebook group." She held up her phone with shaking hands. The post was from a trucker who'd been driving through during the storm. He'd captured dashcam footage of a livestock trailer pulled off on County Road 14 near the Mercer Ranch entrance. In the grainy video, a figure in a rain slicker was leading a horse down the trailer ramp. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. "Someone dumped her here on purpose," Martha breathed. Doc Harrison was setting up an IV, his movements efficient despite his 70 years. "This mare needs surgery on that leg. Antibiotics. Probably a month of intensive care just to stabilize her. She's dehydrated, malnourished, and God knows what else. Thomas, this is going to cost you thousands, and there's no guarantee she'll make it." Thomas looked at his daughter. Rebecca was staring at the horse with tears streaming down her face, but her jaw was set in that stubborn way she'd inherited from him. The same stubbornness that had been driving them apart for months. "We're not putting her down," Rebecca said, her voice steel. "Becca, sweetheart," Martha started. "No." Rebecca's hands were clenched into fists. "Someone threw her away. Someone hurt her and used her up and dumped her here like trash. We're not doing that too. We're not." Thomas felt something break open in his chest. Some wall he hadn't known he'd built. His daughter, his angry, distant daughter, was looking at this broken horse and seeing something worth saving. "Something worth fighting for, Doc," Thomas said quietly. "Do what you need to do, Ed."
Doc Harrison nodded and went back to work. The 4 went in. The wound was cleaned and temporarily bandaged. The mare's breathing began to steady, just slightly. Dawn was fully broken now, the sky clearing to a pale, washed-out blue. Thomas stood with his arm around his daughter's shoulders, watching a stranger's horse bleed on his property, and wondered what the hell had just walked into their lives. The brand on the mare's hip seemed to burn in the morning light, his father's mark on an impossible horse, a puzzle wrapped in pain and deliberate cruelty. Someone had known about that brand. Someone had known about the gate. Someone had chosen the worst night in years to bring this mare here. And Thomas had the cold, creeping certainty that nothing about this was random. "Dad," Rebecca whispered. "Who would do this?" Thomas tightened his arm around her shoulders. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to find out." Doc Harrison worked for 3 hours in the Mercer's barn, converting an empty foaling stall into a makeshift surgical suite. The mare, sedated now, lay on her side on a thick bed of straw while the old veterinarian stitched the wound on her leg with the steady hands of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Thomas stood watch at the stall door, his mind churning. Martha had driven into town to pick up additional supplies. Rebecca refused to leave, sitting cross-legged in the corner of the stall, her phone in her lap, scrolling through something with increasing intensity. "Dad," she said finally, "I think I found something." Thomas walked over and crouched beside her. On her phone screen was a Facebook post from 3 days ago, shared in a regional horse rescue group. The photo showed a different horse, a bay gelding, but the story was sickeningly familiar. Found abandoned on a rural property in the next county over. Emaciated, whip marks, row burns. The rescue group was asking if anyone recognized him. "Keep scrolling," Rebecca said, her voice tight. Thomas scrolled. More posts, going back weeks. A chestnut mare found tied to a fence post outside a veterinary clinic. A paint gelding discovered in an abandoned barn. A black horse left in a livestock auction parking lot after hours. All in surrounding counties. All with the same pattern of abuse and neglect. All abandoned in places where they'd be found and, hopefully, helped. "Someone's dumping horses," Rebecca said. "Not just ours. There's been at least 7 in the last 2 months. Doc Harrison looked up from his stitching. 7. His face was grim. "I've treated 2 of them myself and didn't even connect it. Thought they were isolated cases." "They're connected," Rebecca said. She pulled up another image, this one a screenshot from Horse Forum. "Look at this." Someone posted asking if anyone else had received mystery horses with old brands. Brands that don't match the horse's age. This person in Wyoming got one 3 weeks ago. Another in Montana. "These aren't all local, Dad. This is regional." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Someone's running an operation. "Not just running it," Doc Harrison said, tying off the last stitch. "Shutting it down. These horses aren't escaping. They're being released. Someone's trying to get rid of evidence." The word hung in the air. Evidence. Thomas stood and walked to the stall door, looking out at his ranch. His father had built this place from nothing, working 16-hour days until it killed him. Samuel Mercer had been a hard man, a complicated man, someone Thomas had never fully understood. He died when Thomas was 24, leaving debts and secrets and a brand that was supposed to die with him. "Rebecca," Thomas said slowly, "go to the office. In the filing cabinet, bottom drawer, there should be an old folder. Red. It's got Grandpa's breeding records from before he sold everything." Rebecca scrambled to her feet and ran. Doc Harrison was cleaning his instruments, not meeting Thomas's eyes. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" the veterinarian asked quietly. "That my father's brand showing up on a 6-year-old horse means someone kept using it after he died? Yeah, I'm thinking it. Your father sold that brand when he sold his stock. Standard practice. Whoever bought his breeding program had the legal right to use it. Except Dad's breeding program went bankrupt in 1998. The buyer, the Halstead Corporation, folded 2 years later. That brand should have been retired." Rebecca burst back in the barn, clutching a faded red folder. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide. "Dad, this folder. It's not just breeding records." Thomas took it from her hands. Inside were the expected documents, bloodlines and sale receipts, but tucked in the back was something else. A stack of photographs, yellowed with age. They showed horses, dozens of them, in conditions that made his stomach turn. Overcrowded pens, visible ribs, horses standing in their own filth. And in several photos, standing among the horses with a clipboard, was a man Thomas didn't recognize. 50s, heavy set, with a face like weathered granite. On the back of one photo, in his father's handwriting, were 3 words: Halstead. Problem solved. "Dad," Rebecca's voice was small. "What is this?" Thomas's hand shook as he flipped through the images. There were dates on some of them. 1996, 1997, right up until his father got his diagnosis. And clipped to the last photo was a business card, so old the edges crumbled when he touched it. Halstead Corporation. Premium breeding stock. J. Halstead Proprietor. But someone had crossed out breeding stock and written in pencil beneath it, Contract Holding. Contract Holding, Doc Harrison said, reading over Thomas's shoulder. "That's not a breeding term. That's what they call it when horses are kept as collateral. For debts. Thomas felt the pieces clicking together, a picture emerging that made him sick. My father had debts. Bad ones. Everyone knew that. What if Halstead wasn't just buying Dad's breeding program? What if he was collecting on something? Rebecca grabbed her phone again, fingers flying. Halstead Corporation. Let me search. The barn fell silent except for the mare's labored breathing and the sound of Rebecca typing. Outside, a hawk cried. The wind picked up, rattling the loose panel on the barn roof. Here, Rebecca said. Halstead Corporation. Dissolved in 2000. But look at this. There's a news article from 1999. Local businessman under investigation for livestock fraud. It says the FBI was looking into allegations that James Halstead was operating a front company, buying horses from desperate ranchers at below-market prices, then using them as breeding stock in substandard conditions. There was going to be a federal case, but Halstead died before it went to trial. Heart attack. The company folded and the investigation closed. So the horses just disappeared? Thomas asked. According to this, most of the stock was auctioned off. But there's a line here. Rebecca's voice dropped. It says at least 40 horses were never accounted for. They just vanished. Doc Harrison swore under his breath. 40 horses don't just vanish. They do if someone kept them, Thomas said slowly. If someone inherited Halstead's operation and kept running it underground, used the old brands to make the horses look legitimate. And now, 25 years later, something's changed. Something that made them need to dump the evidence. The mare stirred in the stall behind them, making a sound that was almost human in its distress. Rebecca moved to her side immediately, kneeling in the straw, her hand on the horse's neck. She's burning up, Rebecca said. Doc Harrison was there in seconds, checking the mare's temperature. His face went tight. Infection's setting in faster than I thought. I need to get her on stronger antibiotics. Thomas, I'm going to level with you. This horse has been through hell. Her immune system is shot. Even with treatment, her chances aren't good. Then we give her the best chance we can, Thomas said. Doc Harrison nodded and headed for his truck. Thomas watched him go, then looked down at the photographs still clutched in his hand. His father, upright and proud in his memory, was connected to this. Had sold horses to a man who abused them, who used them as collateral in some scheme that the FBI had been investigating. Had Samuel Mercer known what Halstead was doing? Had he cared? Dad, Rebecca said softly. Even if Grandpa made mistakes, that's not on you. Isn't it? Thomas looked at his daughter. These horses are turning up now, not 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Someone's been keeping them all this time. Someone who might have connections to our family, to this ranch. That mare has Dad's brand. She was left at our gate. This is personal, Rebecca. Then we need to call the police. And tell them what? That we got a horse with a suspicious brand? That we found some old photos? They'll say it's a civil matter, if they care at all. Thomas ran his hand through his hair. We need to find out who else got horses. Compare stories. See if there's a pattern. Rebecca was already on it, her fingers flying across her phone screen. I'm messaging the admin of that rescue group, asking if they'll connect me with the others who reported abandoned horses. Martha's car pulled into the driveway. Through the barn door, Thomas watched his wife get out, arms loaded with medical supplies. She looked tired, older than she had that morning. This was taking a toll on all of them. But when she walked into the barn and saw Rebecca kneeling beside the mare, saw the determination on their daughter's face, something in Martha's expression softened. She set down the supplies and joined them in the stall. She's got a fighting chance, Martha said quietly, reading the situation. Doesn't she, Doc? Doc Harrison, returning with vials of antibiotics, gave them a look that was equal parts skepticism and hope. If she makes it through the night, maybe. That's a big if. Then we take it one night at a time, Martha said. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. His family, his fractured, struggling family, was coming together around this broken horse. But even as gratitude washed over him, his mind was churning with darker thoughts. Somewhere out there was a person or people who had kept 40 horses in conditions that destroyed them, who had used his father's brand, his father's legacy, as cover for abuse. And now they were trying to erase the evidence by dumping horses across 3 states. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She read the message, and her face went pale. "Dad, the rescue group admin just sent me something. She says in every case, the horse that was dumped had an old brand. Different brands, different ranches, but all brands that should be retired or defunct. She's been trying to trace them, but it's like hitting a wall. The companies don't exist anymore. The ranchers are dead or can't be found. Ghost brands, Doc Harrison said. Someone's been collecting ghost brands." The mare made a sound, a low, rattling breath that made them all freeze. For a moment, Thomas thought she was dying right there in front of them. But then her eye opened, just a sliver, and focused on Rebecca's face. The look in that eye was ancient and knowing, as if the horse understood every word they were saying. "Hold on," Rebecca whispered, her hand on the mare's neck. "Please hold on. We're going to figure this out. We're going to help you." The mare's eye closed again, her breathing steady just slightly. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the ranch in shades of orange and gold. Thomas stood at the stall door, the old photographs in one hand, watching his daughter comfort a dying horse that had been sent to them as a message. Someone out there knew the Mercer family history, knew about Samuel Mercer's deals with Halstead. And for some reason, after 25 years of silence, they decided to make it Thomas's problem. He looked down at the business card again, at the pencil notation, "Contract Holding," and beneath it, in handwriting so small he'd almost missed it, was a number. Not a phone number. Too short for that. Just 4 digits, 1147. "Rebecca," Thomas said slowly. "In that rescue group, did anyone mention finding numbers on the horses? Tags, tattoos, anything like that?" Rebecca scrolled back through the messages. "Yeah. One person said their horse had a number burned into the inside of its ear. They thought it was a lot number from an auction." She looked up. "Why?" Thomas held up the card. "Because I think these horses are numbered. And I think we just got number 1147. The mare survived the night. Thomas barely slept, checking on her every 2 hours. Each time he entered the barn, he expected to find her gone. But each time, she was still breathing, still fighting. By dawn, her fever had broken slightly. Doc Harrison arrived at 6 in the morning, took her vitals, and allowed himself a cautious nod. "She's stubborn," the veterinarian said. "I'll give her that." Rebecca had spent the entire night in the barn, curled up on a saddle blanket in the corner of the stall. She looked exhausted but alert, her phone charging on a power bank, her eyes fixed on the mare. "I found them," Rebecca said without preamble. "The others." Thomas walked over, accepting the coffee Martha handed him. "How many?" 14 people across 5 states who reported abandoned horses in the last 3 months. All with old brands. All with numbers. Rebecca pulled up a spreadsheet on her phone. "I've been documenting everything. Look at the pattern." The spreadsheet was meticulous. Each horse listed with a number found tattooed or burned somewhere on their body. The numbers range from 1082 to 1198. Their mare, 1147, fell right in the middle. "That's at least 116 horses," Thomas said quietly. "If the numbering started at 1. Or more," Rebecca said. "These are just the ones that survived being dumped. How many didn't make it?" Her voice cracked. "And where are the rest?" Doc Harrison leaned in to look at the spreadsheet. His face was grim. "You've got dates here for when each horse was found. Is there a pattern?" Rebecca sorted the data. All within the last 12 weeks. Before that, nothing. It's like someone flipped a switch and started dumping them all at once. "Something spooked them," Thomas said. "Something made whoever's holding these horses decide they needed to get rid of the evidence fast." Martha, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "The Halstead investigation closed when James Halstead died in 1999. But what if someone took over his operation? Someone who's been running it for 25 years. Something must have happened recently that threatened to expose them." Thomas thought about this. Death? A sale of property? Someone getting ready to talk. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She read the message and her eyes widened. "Dad, one of the people I contacted, a woman named Sarah Chun in Montana. She says her horse, number 1156, had something else. A tag in its ear under the number tattoo. The tag had a name on it." "What name?" Riverside Holdings, LLC. The name meant nothing to Thomas. He looked at Martha, who shook her head. Doc Harrison frowned, pulling out his own phone. Let me search that. The barn fell quiet while they waited. The mare shifted in her sleep, her injured leg twitching. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, cattle lowing in the distance, birds starting their morning songs. But inside the stall, the world had narrowed to this moment, this search. Got it, Doc Harrison said. Riverside Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware in 2001. That's 2 years after Halstead died. Dissolved last year. Dissolved? Thomas's pulse quickened. When exactly? January 2024. Almost a year ago. Doc Harrison scrolled. Looks like it was a holding company for agricultural properties. I'm seeing land in Wyoming, Montana, Eastern Oregon. A lot of land. Rebecca was typing furiously. Riverside Holdings land sale. Let me see what comes up. What came up made Thomas's blood run cold. A news article from a regional business journal, dated March 2024. Historic ranch properties is sold in multi-million-dollar deal. Riverside Holdings, LLC, sells 12,000 acres across 3 states to Western Star Development Corporation. Properties include former Halstead Ranch in Wyoming. Halstead Ranch, Thomas breathed. Someone bought Halstead's old properties and kept them under a different name. For 25 years, Martha said, running the same operation. Rebecca found another article. Western Star Development. It's a solar energy company. They're building solar farms on all those properties. Construction started last month. She looked up at her father. Dad, if someone was keeping horses on those properties illegally, they'd have maybe a few weeks to clear them out before construction crews arrived. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Somewhere on those properties, hidden away on land that had changed hands 3 times since James Halstead's death, someone had been keeping horses, using them for God knew what, breeding them under stolen brands to make them look legitimate. And when the land sold, when solar panels and construction equipment were scheduled to arrive, they'd had to dump the evidence. But they couldn't just let the horses die on the property. Too obvious, too traceable. So they'd scattered them across 5 states. Each horse left somewhere might be found and helped, each one anonymous except for a number and a brand that led nowhere. Almost nowhere. They didn't count on us recognizing Dad's brand, Thomas said. They didn't know we'd investigate. Or maybe they did, Martha said quietly. Maybe whoever did this wanted someone to find out. Maybe they felt guilty. Rebecca's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, and her face went white. Yes, I understand. Thank you. She hung up and looked at her parents. That was Sheriff Morrison. He wants to come by this afternoon to talk about the mare. Someone filed a report claiming we stole their horse. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. That's impossible, Martha said. She showed up in our driveway. I know, Rebecca said, but someone's claiming ownership, and they're claiming we lured her away from a neighboring property during the storm. Thomas felt rage building in his chest. Who's claiming this? The sheriff wouldn't say over the phone. But Dad, if they take her, if she goes back to whoever had her before. She dies, Doc Harrison finished. She barely survived the trip here. Moving her again in her condition would kill her. Thomas looked at the mare, still sleeping fitfully in the straw. 24 hours ago, he'd never seen this horse. Now she was at the center of something dark and complex, and someone was trying to take her back. Someone willing to lie to the law to do it. When's the sheriff coming? He asked. 2 o'clock. Thomas checked his watch. They gave them 6 hours. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Frank Cordova, FBI, retired. They'd gone to high school together, stayed in touch over the years. Frank had worked white-collar crime before he retired. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Thomas Mercer. Haven't heard from you in a year. Frank, I need your help. I've got a horse with my father's brand and a number tattoo, and I think she's connected to an FBI investigation from 1999. There was a long pause. The Halstead case. Thomas's heart skipped. You know about it? Knew about it. I was fresh out of the academy when that investigation was active. I wasn't on the case, but I remember it. Livestock fraud, contract holding schemes, possible tax evasion. The whole thing fell apart when Halstead died. Another pause. Why are you asking about this now? Thomas explained everything. The storm, the gate, the mare, the photos in his father's files. The pattern of abandoned horses. Riverside Holdings. The solar farm sale. And now, the ownership claim. When he finished, Frank was quiet for a long moment. Thomas, if what you're saying is true, if someone really has been continuing Halstead's operation for 25 years, you're looking at potential wire fraud, animal abuse, probably RICO charges. This is serious. I know. Can you help? I can make some calls. See if anyone's actively investigating Riverside Holdings. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. If there's an active investigation, you could be interfering. And if there isn't, you could be putting yourself in danger. People who run operations like this for decades don't just roll over when they're exposed. Someone already filed a false ownership claim. They're coming for the horse. Then document everything. Photographs, videos, vet records. And when the sheriff arrives, you tell him the truth. All of it. Don't hide anything. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. When Thomas looked up, his family was staring at him. The FBI? Martha asked. He's going to look into it. But we need to be ready for this afternoon. Thomas turned to Doc Harrison. I need you to document every injury on that mare. Photograph everything. Write up a report detailing the neglect and abuse. Date it and sign it. Doc Harrison nodded and pulled out his camera. To Rebecca, Thomas said, get that spreadsheet organized. Print it out if you can. And see if any of the other people who got horses are willing to give statements. What about the claim that we stole her? Martha asked. We fight it. With facts. Thomas looked at the mare again. She'd opened her eyes and was watching them with that same ancient, knowing look. Someone hurt her. Someone is trying to cover it up. And they picked the wrong ranch to dump her at. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Doc Harrison's report was thorough and damning, documenting injuries that could only have come from chronic abuse. Rebecca managed to get 3 people to provide written statements about the horses they'd received, all describing similar conditions and circumstances. Martha printed photos from the internet of the old Halstead properties, showing the layouts where horses could have been hidden. At 1:30, a truck pulled up the driveway. Not the sheriff. A black pickup with tinted windows and no plates. Thomas walked out to meet it, his phone recording in his pocket. A man got out, the same heavy-set, weathered face from the photos in his father's files. Except older now, 70s instead of 50s. He moved like someone who'd spent a lifetime working with livestock, but there was something else in his bearing. Something hard and entitled. You must be Thomas Mercer, the man said. His voice was rough like gravel grinding. I'm here for my horse. And you are? Name's Garrett. Paul Garrett. That gray mare in your barn is stolen property. I've got paperwork proving ownership. Thomas didn't move from the driveway. That mare showed up on my property during a storm, injured and neglected. I'm not handing her over to anyone without seeing documentation and speaking to law enforcement. Garrett's face darkened. Boy, I knew your father. He understood how things worked out here. A man's property is his property. You don't interfere. My father died 23 years ago. Things change. Some things don't. Garrett took a step closer. That horse belongs to me. The sheriff's on his way, and when he gets here, he's going to tell you the same thing. So you can hand her over now, or you can hand her over later. Either way, I'm leaving with my horse. Thomas held his ground. The horse has my father's brand. Something flickered in Garrett's eyes. A lot of horses have a lot of brands. Doesn't mean anything. It does when the brand hasn't been used in 23 years. It does when the horse is 6 years old. Garrett's jaw clenched. For a moment, Thomas thought the man might throw a punch. But then he stepped back, a cold smile spreading across his face. You're making a mistake. A big one. Maybe. But I'm making it with my eyes open. Garrett got back in his truck and drove away, spinning gravel. Thomas watched him go, his hands shaking. Behind him, Martha appeared at the barn door. He's going to come back with the sheriff, she said. I know. Thomas, what if the sheriff sides with him? What if they take her? Thomas turned to look at his wife. Then we make sure the whole county knows about it. We make noise. We don't let this get buried again. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sheriff Morrison's patrol car pulled up. The sheriff was a good man, fair, but he looked uncomfortable as he got out of the car. He had papers in his hand. "Thomas," he said, "we need to talk about that horse." Sheriff Morrison sat at the Mercer kitchen table with 3 folders spread in front of him. One was Paul Garrett's ownership claim. One was Doc Harrison's medical report. The third was Rebecca's spreadsheet and the statements from other horse owners, printed and organized with colored tabs. The sheriff looked tired. "Thomas, I've known you since you were a kid. I knew your father, so I'm going to be straight with you." He tapped Garrett's folder. "This claim is problematic. Garrett's got a bill of sale for a gray mare dated 6 years ago. He's got photos of a horse that could be the one in your barn. And he's got a witness who says they saw you opening your gate during the storm." "That's a lie," Martha said sharply. "We were all inside. The gate was already open when Thomas found the horse." "I believe you. But here's the thing." Morrison opened Garrett's folder. The witness is Garrett's ranch hand. Name's Eddie Sosa. He says he was driving by during the storm, saw Thomas at the gate, saw him lure a horse through. It's his word against yours, and technically, Garrett's got documentation. Rebecca leaned forward. "Sheriff, look at our documentation. That horse has been systematically abused. She's got injuries consistent with months of neglect. The brand on her hip hasn't been used in over 2 decades. And there are 13 other horses with the exact same pattern of abuse, all dumped in the last 3 months." Morrison looked at her spreadsheet, really looked at it. His expression shifted. "You compiled all this in one night. There's more horses than this. We just haven't found them all yet." Rebecca pulled up photos on her phone. "Look, horse 1082, found in Montana. Horse 1129, found in Oregon. Same injuries. Same brands that don't match their ages. Same numbers tattooed in their ears. This isn't about one horse, Sheriff. This is about a systematic operation." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's Morrison. I need you to run a name for me. Paul Garrett. Anything in the system." He waited. "Uh-huh. When? Okay. Thanks." He hung up and looked at Thomas. Garrett was questioned in connection with the Halstead investigation in 1998. Never charged, but he was Halstead's ranch foreman. After Halstead died, Garrett dropped off the radar for a few years. Showed back up in 2003, bought a small place north of here. Been operating quietly ever since. "Operating what?" Thomas asked, though he already knew. "That's the question, isn't it?" Morrison tapped Doc Harrison's medical report. "This report says the mare has injuries consistent with long-term confinement and forced breeding. It says her hooves show she was tied in one position for months. That's not normal ranch management. That's abuse." "Sheriff," Martha said carefully, "what if someone continued Halstead's operation after he died? What if they've been running it for 25 years and only recently had to shut it down?" Morrison looked at her. "You're talking about a massive conspiracy. That would require land, facilities, people willing to stay quiet. That doesn't just happen. It does if they're using remote properties no one ever visits," Rebecca said. She pulled up the articles about Riverside Holdings. "Look at this. Halstead's old ranch and a bunch of associated properties were held by Riverside Holdings until last year. Then they sold to a solar company. Construction crews are on that land right now, Sheriff. If there was evidence there, it's being destroyed as we speak." Morrison read the articles, his frown deepening. "You think Garrett was running horses on those properties?" "I think someone was. And I think when they lost access to the land, they had to dump the horses fast. They scattered them across 5 states, hoping they'd either die or be absorbed into the system without anyone connecting the dots. But you connected them," Morrison said, looking at Rebecca with something like respect. "We got lucky. We recognized Dad's brand." The sheriff sat back in his chair. "Here's my problem. Even if everything you're saying is true, I can't just ignore Garrett's claim. He's got legal documentation. You've got circumstantial evidence and a theory. We got a dying horse with injuries that prove abuse," Thomas said. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It does. But legally, if Garrett can prove ownership, I have to enforce his property rights. Unless," Morrison paused, "unless we can prove the horse was obtained illegally in the first place. Or unless we can prove Garrett's documentation is fraudulent." "The brand," Martha said suddenly. Thomas, who officially owns your father's brand now. Thomas blinked. He never thought about it. I guess I do. Dad left everything to me when he died. Did he file that with the state brand registry? I have no idea. Morrison pulled out his phone again. Give me a minute. He stepped outside to make the call. Thomas looked at his wife. What are you thinking? I'm thinking if you legally own that brand, and if that brand is on the mare, then Garrett's bill of sale might be invalid. You can't sell a horse with someone else's registered brand unless you have proof of transfer. Rebecca's eyes went wide. Mom, that's brilliant. It's a long shot, Martha admitted. But it's something. Sheriff Morrison came back inside. His face was unreadable. Okay, I just talked to the state brand inspector. Samuel Mercer's brand was registered to him until his death in 2002. At that time, it should have been transferred to his heir or retired. It was never officially transferred, but it also was never retired. It's in a kind of legal limbo. So what does that mean? Thomas asked. It means as Samuel Mercer's sole heir, you have a legitimate claim to that brand. And it means any horse bearing that brand would need documentation proving legal transfer of ownership from Mercer. Does Garrett's bill of sale have that? They looked through Garrett's paperwork. The bill of sale listed the seller as J. Halstead Estate. No mention of brand transfer. No mention of how the Halstead Estate had acquired a horse with the Mercer brand in the first place. This doesn't make sense, Morrison said slowly. Halstead died in 1999. Your father died in 2002. If this horse is 6 years old, she was born in 2018 or 2019. How does the Halstead Estate sell a horse that didn't exist when Halstead was alive? The question hung in the air. Rebecca grabbed her laptop. Let me look something up. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Halstead Estate. Legal filings. She went pale. Oh my God. What? Thomas moved to look over her shoulder. The Halstead Estate was administered by a trust. The trustee was listed as Riverside Holdings, LLC, the same company that held all the land. So Riverside Holdings was the Halstead Estate. Martha breathed. And Paul Garrett, Rebecca continued, scrolling through more records, was listed as a property manager for Riverside Holdings from 2001 to 2024. Sheriff Morrison's face had gone hard. So Garrett's been managing the properties where these horses were kept. He's been signing documents as a representative of the Halstead Estate, even though Halstead's been dead for 25 years. And he's using fraudulent bills of sale with impossible dates to claim ownership of horses he's been abusing. That's fraud, Thomas said. That's criminal enterprise. Morrison stood up. I need to make some calls. Federal calls. This is bigger than a property dispute. He looked at Thomas. Don't let Garrett anywhere near that horse. I'm going to get an emergency hold placed on any transfer of ownership pending investigation. How long will that take? I'm calling in favors. Give me 2 hours. Morrison headed for the door, then turned back. Thomas, if I'm right about this, Garrett's not going to go quietly. He's got too much at stake. You need to be careful. After the sheriff left, the Mercer family sat in silence. The weight of what they'd uncovered was sinking in. A 25-year criminal operation. Dozens, maybe hundreds of horses abused and used for illegal breeding. A web of fraud stretching across multiple states. And at the center of it, a single mare with Thomas's father's brand, fighting for her life in their barn. I need to check on her, Rebecca said, standing. Thomas and Martha followed her to the barn. The mare was awake now, her head up, her eyes clearer than they'd been. Doc Harrison had returned to change her bandages and looked pleased with her progress. She's stabilizing, the veterinarian reported. Still a long road ahead, but I think she's going to make it. Rebecca knelt beside the mare, running her hand down the horse's neck. You hear that, girl? You're going to make it. The mare's ears swiveled toward Rebecca's voice. For the first time since she'd arrived, the horse seemed present, aware. She wasn't just surviving. She was coming back. Thomas's phone rang. Frank Cordova. Thomas, I made those calls. You've kicked over a hornet's nest. What did you find? The FBI's been looking at Riverside Holdings for 6 months. Started as a routine investigation into the solar farm sale, checking for environmental violations on the old ranch properties. But when they started digging, they found irregularities, missing livestock records, unexplained water and feed purchases. evidence of structures that weren't on any official maps. They knew about the horses. They suspected something, but they didn't have proof. The properties were sold and cleared before they could get warrants. Frank paused. Until now, Thomas, you just handed them proof. Those horses scattered across 5 states? That's a pattern. That's evidence. And if even one of those horses has Garrett's fingerprints on it, legally speaking, he's finished. The sheriff's putting a hold on the mare. Good. The FBI is going to want to examine her. Document everything. She's evidence now. Thomas looked at the mare, at his daughter, stroking her mane, at the quiet strength in the horse's eyes. She's more than evidence, he said quietly. She survived. She deserves better than being a case file. Then make sure she gets it. But first, help us put Garrett away. They talked for a few more minutes about logistics, about statements and documentation. When Thomas hung up, Martha was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked. Your father, she said softly. He made mistakes. He dealt with Halstead when he shouldn't have. But he didn't know it would lead to this. And now you're fixing it. You're doing what he couldn't. Thomas felt emotion well up in his throat. I'm just trying to help a horse. You're doing more than that. You're breaking a cycle. You're choosing to be different. Rebecca looked up from the mare. Dad, she's trying to stand. They all moved at once, supporting the mare as she struggled to her feet. Her legs shook, the injured one barely taking weight. But she was standing, on her own, fighting. That's it, Rebecca murmured. That's it, girl. You're so strong. The mare took a tentative step, then another. Doc Harrison guided her carefully, making sure she didn't put too much pressure on the bad leg. But she was moving. She was walking. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the barn in golden light. Through the open door, Thomas could see Sheriff Morrison's car coming back up the driveway, faster than before. Behind him were 2 more vehicles, dark SUVs with government plates. The FBI, Martha said. Already, Thomas checked his watch. It had barely been 90 minutes. The vehicles parked, and a woman in a dark suit got out of the lead SUV. She was 50-ish, with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. She walked straight to the barn, her ID already out. Thomas Mercer? I'm Special Agent Lisa Vasquez. I need to see the horse. Thomas stepped aside. Agent Vasquez entered the stall, her eyes taking in the mare, the injuries, the number tattoo in her ear. She pulled out a tablet and started photographing everything, her movements efficient and practiced. This is 1147, she asked. Yes. We've been looking for her. She's one of the breeding mares. High-value bloodlines stolen from an estate sale in 2001. Vasquez looked up at Thomas. This horse alone is worth over $100,000. She's proof of a theft that's been covered up for nearly 25 years. Rebecca's hand tightened on the mare's halter. What happens to her now? After we document everything? After she testifies, so to speak, by existing? Vasquez's expression softened slightly. That's up to the courts. But typically, recovered stolen property goes back to the legal owner or their estate. And if there's no legal owner, then she'd likely be auctioned by the government. Vasquez saw Rebecca's face. But that's a long way off. First, she needs to heal. And first, we need to build a case. Sheriff Morrison appeared in the doorway. Lisa, we've got a situation. Paul Garrett just filed an emergency injunction claiming the Mercers are holding his property illegally. He's got a judge's order for immediate return of the horse. Agent Vasquez's face went cold. What judge? Judge Harmon. County Court. Judge Harmon is Garrett's brother-in-law. Vasquez pulled out her phone. I'm getting a federal hold on that animal right now. Garrett doesn't get within a mile of her. But even as she made the call, Thomas heard the sound of a truck engine. A big one, coming up the ranch road fast. Paul Garrett wasn't waiting for the FBI. He was coming for his horse now. The livestock trailer came roaring up the driveway, kicking up gravel and dust. Behind it was another truck and another. 3 vehicles total, 6 men including Paul Garrett. They were coming in force. Agent Vasquez stepped in front of the barn door, her hand resting on her sidearm. Nobody moves that horse. This is now a federal crime scene. Garrett climbed out of his truck, his face red with rage. That's my property. I've got a court order. Your court order is worthless. This animal is evidence in a federal investigation. You touch her, you're obstructing justice. Vasquez's voice was steel. Back away from the barn. The hell I will. Garrett started forward. Sheriff Morrison stepped between them, his own hand on his weapon. Paul, don't make this worse than it already is. You're done. We know about Riverside Holdings. We know about the breeding operation. We know everything. You don't know anything, Garrett snarled. You got some old photos and a horse that wandered on a Mercer property. That doesn't prove. We have 14 horses across 5 states, Rebecca said, stepping out of the barn. Her voice was shaking but fierce. We have medical records proving systematic abuse. We have financial records showing Riverside Holdings was a front for the Halstead operation. And we have you listed as property manager for 23 years. Garrett's eyes fixed on Rebecca with such hatred that Thomas moved instinctively to put himself between them. You should have minded your own business, little girl. She is minding her business, Martha said, appearing at Rebecca's side. That horse has my husband's family brand. That makes her our business. One of Garrett's men, a younger guy with nervous eyes, spoke up. Boss, maybe we should just... Shut up, Eddie. Garrett didn't take his eyes off Thomas. Your father knew how things worked. He knew when to look the other way. He understood that some debts get paid in ways that don't show up on paper. Thomas felt something click in his mind. What debt? Your ranch. This beautiful spread. Garrett gestured around. You think Samuel Mercer built all this on honest ranching? He was drowning in debt in the 90s. Halstead bailed him out. In exchange, Mercer gave him access to his breeding stock and looked the other way when horses came and went. He gave him his brand to use. And when Halstead died, those agreements didn't die with him. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. His father hadn't just sold horses to Halstead. He'd been part of the operation. You're lying, Martha said. Am I? Garrett smiled coldly. Ask yourself how a man on the edge of bankruptcy in 1995 suddenly had money to expand his ranch in 96 and 97. Ask yourself where that money came from. Agent Vasquez had her phone out, recording everything. Keep talking, Mr. Garrett. You're making my case for me. But Garrett was past caring. 25 years of secrets were spilling out. Samuel Mercer gave Halstead his brand in exchange for cash. Halstead used that brand on horses acquired through questionable means. When the FBI started sniffing around, Mercer got scared. Wanted out. But you don't get out of deals like that. Halstead owned him. And when Halstead died, I inherited those deals, including the understanding that the Mercer Ranch would continue to provide cover. Cover for what? Sheriff Morrison demanded. For whatever I needed. Garrett's smile was vicious. A brand that no one questioned. A family name that opened doors. Thomas here was supposed to keep his mouth shut and let things be. But instead, he had to play hero. Thomas's mind was reeling. Everything he'd thought about his father, about how they'd kept the ranch, about their family's legacy, was built on lies. But through the shock, one clear thought emerged. It didn't matter. What his father had done was done. What mattered was what Thomas did now. You're right, Thomas said quietly. My father made mistakes. He got in bed with criminals to save this place. But those debts died with him. And they sure as hell don't transfer to me. See, that's where you're wrong. Garrett pulled a folded paper from his jacket. I've got a contract signed by Samuel Mercer in 1996. It stipulates that in exchange for financial assistance, the Mercer family grants Halstead Holdings and its successors perpetual use of the Mercer brand and cooperation in livestock management. That contract is legally binding and transfers to heirs. Agent Vasquez held out her hand. Let me see that. Garrett hesitated, then handed it over. Vasquez read it, her expression unchanging. Then she handed it to Thomas. Read the third clause. Thomas read. His hand started shaking. This contract is void upon proof of criminal activity by either party. Your father put in an escape clause, Vasquez said. Probably figured if Halstead ever got caught, the contract would be invalidated. Smart man. He was covering his ass. Garrett spat. Didn't have the guts to see it through. No, Thomas said, looking up from the paper. He was protecting his family. He made mistakes, but he tried to give us a way out. Sheriff Morrison took the contract from Thomas. Paul Garrett, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, animal abuse, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. You can't prove anything. Garrett's composure was cracking. Those horses could have come from anywhere. That contract could be interpreted a dozen different ways. You've got nothing. We have everything, Rebecca said. She held up her phone. While you were talking, I sent your confession to 12 different people, including the media. Your own words admitting to running a criminal operation for 25 years. It's already online. Garrett lunged toward her. Thomas and Morrison both moved, but it was one of Garrett's own men who grabbed his boss, holding him back. Enough, the man said. It was Eddie, the nervous one. It's done, Paul. It's over. Garrett sagged in Eddie's grip. All the fight went out of him at once. Sheriff Morrison cuffed him while Agent Vasquez read him his rights. The other men stood silent, some relieved, some shocked. It was like watching a dam break, decades of pressure releasing all at once. As Morrison led Garrett to his patrol car, the man turned back to look at Thomas. Your father was weak. He couldn't do what needed to be done. I see you the same. Thomas met his eyes. My father made the hard choice to try to protect his family from men like you. If that's weakness, I'll take it. Garrett was loaded into the patrol car. Eddie and the other men were separated for questioning. Agent Vasquez was on her phone, coordinating with her team. In the chaos, Thomas slipped back into the barn. The mare stood in her stall, Rebecca at her side, both of them watching the commotion through the open door. The horse's dark eyes were calm now, peaceful in a way they hadn't been before. She'd witnessed her abuser's downfall. Maybe she didn't understand the specifics, but animals knew when the threat was gone. Is it really over? Rebecca asked softly. The investigation's just starting. But Garrett's finished. Thomas put his arm around his daughter. You did good, kid. You solved this thing. We solved it. As a family. Rebecca leaned into him. Dad, about Grandpa. I know. It's a lot to process. He wasn't a bad man, was he? Thomas thought about that. His father's face in his memory, stern but not unkind. A man who worked until his hands bled. A man who'd made deals with the devil to save his ranch, then tried to leave his son a way out. He was a complicated man who made bad choices in desperate times. But he loved us. And in the end, he tried to do right. Martha joined them in the stall, wrapping her arms around both of them. What happens now? Now. Thomas looked at the mare. Now we help her heal, however long it takes. The FBI's going to want to take her eventually, Rebecca said. For evidence, or to return to some legal owner we've never heard of. Maybe, Thomas said. But Agent Vasquez said that's a long way off. Until then, she stays here. She recovers here. And when the time comes, we'll figure it out. The mare took a step toward them, moving more steadily now. She lowered her head and breathed in Rebecca's scent, then Thomas's, then Martha's. A moment of connection, of recognition. She knew who had saved her. We need to give her a name, Rebecca said. We can't keep calling her the mare. What about Justice? Martha suggested. Rebecca shook her head. What about hope? Because that's what she brought us. Hope that we could be better than the past. Hope that we could come together as a family again. Thomas felt his throat tighten. His angry, distant daughter, who'd been pulling away for months, was standing in a barn with him and her mother, naming a horse they'd saved together. The mare had done that. This broken, abused animal had given them a reason to fight side by side. Hope, he said. I like it. Over the next 3 weeks, Hope continued to heal. Doc Harrison visited daily, changing bandages, monitoring her progress, marveling at her resilience. Rebecca slept in the barn most nights, refusing to leave her alone. Martha brought meals, sat with them, read aloud from books while Hope dozed in the straw. Thomas handled the investigators, the media calls, the legal proceedings. The FBI's case against Garrett expanded rapidly. They found burial sites on the old Halstead properties where horses had been disposed of. Financial records showing hundreds of horses bought and sold illegally over 2 decades. A network of corrupt buyers and sellers across multiple states. Garrett had been running one of the largest livestock fraud operations in American history. But he hadn't been working alone. Arrests followed. Ranch hands, buyers, even a veterinarian who'd falsified health certificates. The web was vast and ugly. The news coverage was relentless. And through it all, the Mercer family stuck together. Rebecca delayed her college start date to help with Hope's recovery. Martha started a support group for families affected by the horse dumping. Thomas testified before a grand jury, sharing what he'd learned about his father's involvement and his own decision to break the cycle. The media called him a hero. He didn't feel like one. He felt like a man who'd been forced to reckon with his family's past and had barely managed to do the right thing. 6 weeks after Hope arrived, Agent Vasquez returned to the ranch. She looked pleased but tired. "We've located most of the horses," she reported. 62 in total. 37 survived the dumping. The rest. She shook her head. "Justice will be served, but it won't bring them back." "What about Hope?" Rebecca asked, the question they'd all been dreading. Vasquez pulled out a folder. "We traced her bloodline. She's descended from a mare stolen from a Pennsylvania breeder in 2001. The breeder's estate was settled years ago. Technically, Hope should be auctioned to settle the debt." Rebecca's face crumbled. "So we lose her?" "Actually," Vasquez smiled slightly, "the Pennsylvania breeder's daughter heard about the case. She says if the Mercer family wants to buy Hope at auction, she'll set the reserve price at $1. She says anyone willing to fight this hard for a horse deserves to keep her." The barn went silent. $1. Martha whispered. $1. The auction is required by law, but there's no law saying she has to set a high price. Vasquez handed Thomas the folder. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. Show up, bid your $1, and she's yours." After Vasquez left, the family stood in Hope's stall, processing the news. The mare, stronger now and nearly healed, nuzzled Rebecca's shoulder. "We get to keep her," Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. "We get to keep her," Thomas confirmed. 2 weeks later, in a county courthouse, Thomas Mercer bid $1 on lot 1147. No one else bid. Hope became legally theirs. On the drive back to the ranch, Rebecca sat in the truck bed with Hope, who rode calmly in a borrowed trailer. Thomas watched them in the rearview mirror, his daughter and the horse they'd saved together. Martha reached over and took his hand. "Your father would be proud. You broke the cycle. You chose different." "We chose different," Thomas corrected. "All of us." That night, they released Hope into the main pasture for the first time. She stood for a moment at the gate, as if not quite believing she was free. Then she walked out slowly, her head high, her injured leg barely showing a limp. She moved across the grass with dignity, with strength, with purpose. At the fence line, she paused and looked back at the family who'd saved her. Thomas, Martha, and Rebecca stood together, watching. Hope tossed her head once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of gratitude. Then she turned and ran. She ran like she'd been waiting her whole life to run. Not away from something, but towards something. Toward a future that was hers to choose. Toward freedom that had been bought with courage and truth and a family's willingness to face their darkest secrets. Rebecca wiped tears from her face. "She's beautiful." "Yeah," Thomas said softly. "She is." They stood at the fence until Hope disappeared over a hill into the gathering dusk. The ranch spread around them, built on complicated history, but standing now on a foundation of truth. The gate that had been left open during the storm had changed everything. It had brought them hope. It had brought them together. It had forced them to be better than their past. "Do you think she'll come back?" Martha asked. "I think," Thomas said, watching the horizon where hope had vanished. "She'll come back when she's ready. She knows where home is now." And she did come back, hours later, when the stars were out and the ranch was quiet. She came back to the barn where Rebecca waited with fresh hay and clean water. She came back to the family who had fought for her, who had risked everything to give her a future. Hope came home because she knew, finally, what it meant to belong somewhere. To be wanted, to be safe. The Mercers never forgot the night of the storm, the night their gate swung open and destiny walked through on 4 legs. They told the story often in the years that followed, as Hope grew strong and healthy, as Rebecca returned from college with a degree in animal justice, as Martha's support group helped dozens of families affected by Garrett's crimes. They told it not as a story of heroism, but as a story of choice. of a family given a chance to break a cycle of corruption and choosing, together, to be better, of a horse who survived hell and chose to trust again, of a gate left open that could have been a tragedy, but instead became their salvation. And they always ended the story the same way, with the line Rebecca had spoken that first morning, the line that had started everything. Someone threw her away. Someone hurt her and used her up and dumped her here like trash. We're not doing that too. They hadn't. They'd chosen different. And in choosing different, they'd rewritten their family's future, one act of courage at a time. Hope lived on the Mercer Ranch for 23 more years, long and healthy and loved. When she finally passed, peacefully in the same stall where she'd first fought for her life, the entire family was there. They buried her on the hill where she used to run, and they planted an oak tree above her, so she'd always be part of the land she'd helped redeem. The tree grew strong and tall, its branches spreading wide. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear the sound of hoofbeats on the hill. A gray mare running free, finally and forever home.